I do a lot of teaching and talking about how to create great messages. And so I actually just wanted to record from start to finish my process and talk through some of the things I do that I think really aid in preparation. So I'm about to sit down and write my message for our youth ministry. And so I want to share with you my insights along the way and then how the message comes out. And so I really hope this is a good one since it'll be on video and you'll get to critique it. So the first thing that I don't always do, but I always should do, is to spend time praying over the whole process and for God's insight and help for the Holy Spirit's leading. So I'm going to do that now. Now I'm going to begin the Bible study part of my preparation, and the goal here is to use the French press method. And so you grind, that's the study, hit the books part, and then you let all those truths kind of seep together with all the things your students need, and then you take the overlap of that to create a big idea, because any message is only as good as the unifying idea at the center of it. And so that's really my goal at this stage. So I have my scrap paper, this is old stuff. Right on this side so that I can make as many notes as I want. I'm going to get out a bunch of different Bible translations. I'm going to start just by reading the text in a bunch of different translations. Then I might pull out some commentaries and do some study. So my goal at this point is first understanding. I want to understand the first century context in which this text from Luke chapter 7 is really, really well. So here we go. So I've studied the text in multiple translations. I've really sought to understand the first century context, and using that I came up with what I call an exegetical summary. It's just my paraphrase of the passage, which is pretty long and pretty bulky. Here's my summary for Luke chapter 7, 36 through 50. This is where the sinful woman anoints Jesus with her tears and perfume, and then Jesus tells a parable that connects to her and Simon the Pharisee, who's been a little bit rude to Jesus. So my exegetical summary is, it's a mouthful. Jesus is invited to the home of a Pharisee, Simon. Simon, in an underhanded manner, shames Jesus by not offering typical hospitality, such as water for washing Jesus' feet or oil for anointing his head. While they're eating the meal, a woman with the worst kind of reputation comes in and, sobbing, wets Jesus' feet with her tears, dries them with her hair, and then anoints them with valuable perfume. Simon, believing that if something unclean touches someone who is clean, it makes that person unclean, concludes that Jesus must not actually be a prophet or a great teacher, since he's letting this sinner touch him. Jesus, knowing what Simon is thinking, tells a parable that makes the point that people who are forgiven more love more and show greater gratitude. He looks at the woman and connects the characters of the parable with Simon and the woman and tells the woman that her sins have been forgiven. So then I take all that and I ask the Jesus question, from all of this, what do my students most need to become more like Jesus? And so I just jotted down a couple of thoughts. So first of all, putting themselves kind of in the position of the woman, they need to realize that no sin can separate them from God's love. That God's heart for them is like Jesus' heart is for this woman. And then secondly, they need to adopt a heart like Jesus's, not like Simon's, for those who are lost. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just really have a brainstorming session of big ideas that both capture the biblical truth of this story and capture one element, or hopefully most of the elements that I have in my answer to that Jesus question. What do they need to become more like Jesus? Meshed together with that exegetical summary. And so I'm just playing at this point. Like, I'm gonna come up with like 50 terrible ideas, but one of them might be mediocre, and then I'll take that mediocre idea and play with it and get different versions of it and alter it, and hopefully get that better and better. Also, just a warning, I often find that this is one of the most frustrating parts of my preparation, and the part that I'm most tempted to give into distractions and start doing something else, or just go with an idea that I don't love. And I've really had to learn to push through this process and work towards and keep working at it. It's normal for me, for my study time and my brainstorming time and coming up with a good idea, to sometimes take up to half of my message preparation. Because once you get a really good big idea that's relevant to your students and true to the text, you'll find that most other things fall into place pretty easily. So I'm just going to start jotting ideas. Alright, I'm feeling really good and really excited because I got, I think, a good big idea. And it was a process. I've probably been sitting here 30 minutes trying to figure something out. And so a couple of the tools I use are to take phrases or ideas I like, and then I'll use the thesaurus, my dictionary on my computer, to try swapping out words. So like for a long time I liked the rhyme of very and barely. So like whether you're very lost or barely lost, you need to be found, or something like that. So I used the thesaurus for different versions of the word lost, or even just brainstorm those. So like whether you're very dirty or barely dirty, broken, sick, wrong. And then I was trying to make the second half of that parallel, or rhyme, or say the opposite. So like whether you're very lost or barely lost, the key is to, and then I wanted to rhyme with lost if I could. Find if it's succinct and either alliterates or rhymes, it becomes really, really memorable. So my other tool is to use the rhyming dictionary online. I just look up, rhyme with lost. And I came up with bossed, tossed, cost, crossed. And I just couldn't come up with a phrase that didn't sound cheesy. That's something I struggle with. Sometimes when you make it rhymey, it just sounds just really cheesy. And so I just didn't want to force it and make it sound natural. I almost went with wrong, because one of those rhymes is belong. So like whether your actions are whether your actions have been very wrong or barely wrong, Jesus invites you to belong. But I just didn't feel like it totally captured the heart of what I wanted to get at. So I just kept brainstorming and playing with different ideas that I put together. And I kept going back to the idea of the lost and found theme. Like, if you've been found, you should seek the lost, or have compassion for the lost, right? If you've been lost, then you should pity the lost, or something like that. And then just like out of the blue, I was like, oh yeah, like isn't there a phrase about keeping something you find? And I remember the phrase, finders, keepers, losers, weepers. So I was like, I wonder if I could do something with that. I mean, that's already rhyming and everyone knows it. I wonder if I could switch that around. And so right now, my big idea is, in God's kingdom, the losers are the keepers, and the finders are the weepers. So what I'm getting at is, the losers are the keepers. The ones who are most lost are the ones God wants to keep and wants to get and has his heart for. The losers are the keepers, and the finders are the weepers. The people who would be willing to go out and seek others are the people who would be broken and have wept over their own sin and transgression and been broken by that, and then go out and seek others. So as soon as I came up with that, I was like, I think this is it. This feels right. And so now what I'm going to do is going to take that big idea and then plug it into my outline. So I have 5 pieces to my outline. This isn't the point where I'll go through all those in detail. You can find other videos on that. I will say, as I was even studying the text, sometimes I would get an idea for like an experiment. Like I came up with a possible idea for a game we could play that would prove a point. So I've actually already started collecting, while I was studying, some ideas for how I might grab attention, or points about the first century context I needed to make. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this big idea, and then I'm just going to work through my outline. Alright, I brainstormed away. Now, just to be clear, I kind of go back and forth between paper and computer. I use my computer for brainstorming my exegetical idea and summary and big idea just because I can delete quickly, and then also I use the computer to look up, use the thesaurus and the rhyming dictionary, and I can type much quicker than I can write. So since I'm just brainstorming ideas and trying to get as many as I can, I'll use the computer for that. But then when I go back to making the first draft of my outline, I'll maybe reference that work and the big idea work and the things I thought of, but I'll actually go back to paper for the first draft of my outline. So I've just finished brainstorming first. What are the ways I could build tension? What is the tension of this text? What do I need to make sure I include? And so I have a rough macro outline for my talk. And so let me just talk you through where I am now with this, but also let you know this is going to change. So I've done the work, I have my macro outline, but now one of the most important parts is that today is Wednesday, and I will not teach this until Sunday night. And so between now and then I'll continue to work on it, but also I'll just let it sit and steep. And as you do that, you'll find you get other ideas or better ideas. Another thing I like to do is talk it over with my wife. I talk through parts, and that helps me be clear on what I'm trying to communicate. And then oftentimes she'll have an idea of an illustration or how to make a game better or something like that. So all that said, this is not the final product. This is my first draft of my macro outline. So one, I'm going to grab attention by discussing the tension. So instead of sharing a personal story this week, I'm going to talk about how Jesus was received and the fact that pretty consistently in the Gospels, the people who were worst off were most welcoming to Jesus, and the better people, the religiously good people, tended to reject Jesus. So we're going to discuss why do you think that was? Why do you think Jesus was received so well among the worst people? But then I'm going to raise the tension of, do you think the same thing is true today? Do you think it's harder to invite Jesus like you should if you've grown up in church and you're a pretty good kid? So I'm going to have them discuss the question, when it comes to Jesus and accepting Jesus, is it better to be a better person or a worse person? And then the tension I'm going to raise after that is, if somehow I'm actually at a disadvantage being a better person, then how do I overcome that and what do I do? That's the transition to the text. Then I'll read the story, talk about some of the stuff I've already talked about through Luke 7, especially highlighting Simon's rudeness, showing his rejection of Jesus, the clean versus unclean stuff, what was going on in the first century context, and kind of build my way towards that big idea of God's kingdom. The losers are keepers, and finders are weepers. Now, to prove both the main idea and then to also illustrate something from Jesus' parables, I'll switch after the Bible study time to an experiment. So experiment to experience the truth. I think I'm going to do an upfront game. So I'll say, like, who here is really good at doing a lot of push-ups? Because that's going to come at the end of this game. And so I'll bring up probably 2 guys, I'm assuming, and then we'll play a short trivia game. And instead of getting points for every question you get right, you will get push-ups if you are not the one to answer right or first. So we'll have like maybe 5 trivia questions that I'll ask them, and hopefully one of them will have like 150 push-ups and one of them will have like 50 push-ups or something like that. And then I'll like even have them like get on the ground and get ready to start doing push-ups, and then be like, actually guys, I'm going to choose to forgive your debt. You don't have to do the push-ups. They'll probably actually want to, but I'll cut it off at that point, and then we'll discuss how that relates to Jesus' parable. Right? How is this like or unlike the parable that Jesus told where these people are forgiven? Which of these 2 guys do you think are more grateful for my forgiveness? Obviously the one who's been forgiven more. And then again, raising that tension of, like, how does this connect to real life? Is it true in real life that people who have been forgiven more are generally more grateful towards God and more soft and more outwardly worshipful of him? Jesus seems to say that it is. So then the transition to the application is, what do you do if you identify more with Simon in this parable than with the woman, if you don't feel like you're a great sinner? So the application, first 2 points are, if that's you and if you want to cultivate that heart, if you want to overcome some of those disadvantages, to cultivate gratitude for what God has done for you through worship. And then I'll pull out kind of that rhymey phrase, right? Because whether you're very forgiven or barely forgiven, you can only be found through God's grace. You need God's grace and you need his forgiveness. And so I think I might even start the application in the lesson time and have a piece of paper and just ask them to spend 2 minutes while I have a worship song playing of, what are you grateful that God has forgiven you for? Kind of a forgiveness list, and not to pull up past regrets, to appreciate God's grace now, and just to have them list out, God, thank you for forgiving me for, and just list some things out. So I want them to cultivate gratitude through worship, and then number 2, to grow a bigger heart for the lost through prayer. To cultivate a bigger heart for the lost through prayer. That application we're actually going to roll into our small group time. So that's the application point we'll talk more about in our small groups and give time for in our small groups for them to pray for friends and kids who are far from God, that they would come to know God. So that's the application. Apply as soon as possible. I'm going to do some of that within the lesson time itself, and then finally touch their hearts and inspire them to live it. And I'm just going to share with them why I struggle with this story. As I read it and was studying it this morning, I was like, there's something I don't like about this story. And I think it's just the fact that when you take Jesus at his word, he's suggesting that if you've grown up in a Christian home and if you've done most things right, you're kind of at a disadvantage. You will tend to be less loving of God and less grateful for his grace and have less of a heart for the lost. And I don't like that. I don't like being disadvantaged, and I don't want to be like Simon the Pharisee. And so I'm just going to share with them my heart, man. I don't want to let those good blessings that have been given to me growing up in a Christian home, growing up in church, not making a lot of mistakes, I don't want those good things to turn into bad things. And just inspiring them that, look, it doesn't have to be that way. It's not a guarantee that if you're raised in a good home, you'll be ungracious and ungrateful for God's grace and not have a heart for the lost. But if you don't want it to be that way, you have to cultivate that heart and that attitude. And then I'm just going to share, by way of inspiration, a story of someone I know coming to faith. Right? Like, it's so good to see someone who's far from God coming to faith. It might be the story of my little brother or someone in our small group. I haven't decided yet, but I'm going to share a more personal story of someone coming to faith, the transformation that took place in their life, and just encourage them, man, don't you want that for your friends? And if so, let's reach out to them together. Because in God's kingdom, losers are keepers, and finders are weepers. So let's keep our hearts soft and grateful towards how much we have been forgiven, and let's cultivate a heart for those who haven't received that yet. So that's my rough draft, first draft, macro outline. Again, I'm going to stew on that. I'm going to talk it over with my wife. And I wanted to do all this just to show you how planning a message doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be super time consuming. It's been less than 2 hours, and I've gone from a text to a message in less than 2 hours. And part of that is because I've been doing this for a while. I've been doing this 11 years now. But another part of that is having a go-to outline that I use. And it's so helpful to work really hard on a big idea, and then once you get that, you can plug it in and you have a basic structure for your talk. So I hope this is helpful for you. If you have questions, you can put them in the comments box. Again, if you don't know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about this outline, I have a video where I walk through step by step the outline I use. Also, you can go to my website, makeyourmessagegreat.com, where you can enter your name and subscribe to my newsletter. And if you do that, I will send you a copy of the outline and a blank outline form that you can use when you're prepping, and summaries of all the different steps. So I hope this was helpful, and I just want to encourage you now to do your work and to create messages that change lives for good.